We'll take questions, some questions that were fed into us ahead of time, but we're happy to take questions on the fly as well. Playing a little stump the chump, ask us questions, see if we can answer them for you, give you some good advice. If there's anything that we're unable to answer, we can always follow up afterwards as well. But since the recording just started again, I'll once again welcome everybody to AEM Champions Office Hours. This time we are going to be talking about AEM Cloud Manager with some folks from our 2022 AEM Champion class. Real quick agenda. First, we're just going to touch on, make sure everybody understands what the Adobe Champion program is. We won't dwell on that, but just so you know who you're chatting with today. Some of the folks that we got on the panel today, definitely the best in the industry. You couldn't be asking for advice from better folks. We'll introduce them all, and then we will start in with some of the pre-submitted questions. We do have a handful of questions that were brought to us beforehand. Just a reminder for future office hours, if you're looking to get some questions answered, you can submit them ahead of time, and we'll do our best to get through all of those. But again, feel free to add questions to the chat area throughout the presentation, and we'll get to those as well. Hence, number 4, we'll be answering live questions, and then we'll wrap up with a little bit of FYI around the AEM Champions program, talking about the Champions program in 2024, which is exciting, 23 to 24, so I guess it's the 23 class, coming up real quick, as well as future office hours. So the AEM Champions program, who are we? Well, we are a dedicated group of practitioners that play key roles at our companies as either thought leaders or product influencers, not just at our companies though, but also in the industry as well, in the community. Some of the things that we do, like this office hours, to get our knowledge out into the industry and just offer it as a service, be helpful to folks. We're just passionate about tools, passionate about ensuring people are getting the value from the tools, sharing our technical expertise, best practices, strategies, both from a technical side as well as a practitioner side. So as we get to at the end where we're wrapping up and applying for AEM Champions, don't feel that this is a technology only group. We highly value and have champions that are on the practitioner side as well. Honestly, our lead this year, Greg Damaris, is more on the practitioner side. Probably one of the smartest guys you'll ever find on the AEM in the AEM community, and most helpful. You'll see him all over the place. In terms of benefits, we get to share and network with each other, which honestly is a humongous benefit. Gives us a tight-knit community to ask our questions internally as we run into things that we haven't run into before, getting alternate opinions. So it can be highly valuable for those that are part of the program. We get to collaborate with the product leaders at Adobe, understand what's coming down the pipe for roadmap, as well as have some opportunity to influence that as well. And then last but certainly not least, the opportunity to engage in exclusive speaking and content creation events, and increase our own personal brands. It's just an overall great program. This 2022 was the inaugural program. We hit the ground running. It's been a great program run by Robert Solvey, and look forward to an awesome class in 2023. Your panelists today, I'm going to hand it over to Max. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks very much, Brett. Hi guys, my name is Max Bryce. I'm the CTO at Ancora. It's a Adobe-only consultancy. We offer full stack implementations of Adobe tech to clients in Australia. So I'm pretty far away from the rest of the team, but I'm here nonetheless. I do have connections to quite a lot of people in Adobe in Australia, and I know a lot of people here on the ground as well. So yeah, keen to pass on my knowledge. I also look after the AEM design blog online, and I publish online quite a bit, so hopefully I'll see you around there.
Thanks, Max. Go ahead, Rami.
Sounds good. So the name is Rami Al-Gamal. I am a senior solution architect as well as the director of Rene Consulting, which is a small consulting firm based in North America, so both Canada and the States, doing everything Adobe, AEM as one branch, but commerce, target, analytics, all the journeys, AAP, etc. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Rami. And Venkatesh.
Hi all, this is Venkatesh. I'm working as a multi-solution architect in Qatar Airways. I do handling Adobe as a platform where multiple integrations between the Adobe suites So predominantly handling the commercial brand of Qatar Airways, which is qatarairways.com.
Excellent. Thanks, Venkatesh. So we've got an awesome technical panel for you today, given that the topic today is quite technical. Just so you know where I'm Brett Birschbach, SVP of the Adobe practice at Bounteous. We are a full service Adobe agency, AP, AJO, CDP, CJA, all the acronyms. But I've grown up as a developer in AEM myself, developer and architect, and now lead the engineering group of Adobe technologists at Bounteous and have a special place in my heart for AEM. And I will be doing my best to moderate these fine-looking gentlemen on your panel today. So with that, let's go ahead and hide the screen and let's jump in just for a real quick overview for those that maybe are less familiar with Cloud Manager, or just to make sure we're all talking the same thing. I just want to open with a quick overview of Cloud Manager. What are some things maybe we generally use it for, and what are some things that maybe it's not for? If we could just start with that. I know, Rami, you had a few ideas.
Yeah, sounds good. A lot of the times when we think about Cloud Manager, the problem is you go from your typical sort of on-prem flow that you have today, whether it's from a CI/CD perspective, so deployment, development, Git repositories, or whatever you're using, all the way to going in and being able to alter things within AEM on the fly. And I know there was a couple questions, so I'll touch lightly on that, as well as going into debugging. Now, Cloud Manager does some of this stuff, not all of this stuff. And we tend to mix what it does and what it doesn't do. That's why we started with this topic. So what does Cloud Manager do? Cloud Manager will give you access to the deployment process. So not pre-deployment. This has nothing to do with your branching strategy, with your, Git flow, or whatever you're going to do, your release branches, your development branches. It has nothing to do with the approval process of PRs, MRs, whatever you're going to use to look pull requests, etc. What it does allow you, or where it starts to be active, is the code is approved, it's good to go. Now I need to deploy it to my container, whether it's your dev environment, your RDE, or your prod, etc. So it does provide you with a Git repository, but again, that Git repository should, underline should, be used for the deployment process, not the governance process, right? Now, assuming that the deployment is done, there's level automation, of course, whether you want to do like an on-push deployment, etc. But even after that, we go into debugging. So it will give you access to things you typically would have had access to directly on your CRXDE or your system console. Or you're just simply your logs, going in to be able to see your logs, whether it's a dispatcher, whether it's your different instances, etc. Again, it's not the tool that would allow you to go in and alter something into System Console. It would allow you to see what's in System Console. So think of it as a read-only process. The only write that you do with Cloud Manager is the deployment. Now, what it's not is, it's not Jenkins. Don't treat it as Jenkins. It's definitely not Jenkins, right? You can do your entire process, or anything parallel to that, of course. You can do your entire process of approval within your Jenkins, Bamboo, or whatever, Azure, whatever you're using to get to that point outside of the realm. Once your artifact is ready, you're going to push it to the Git repository that Adobe provides. So in theory, you should have your own Git repository, and I strongly recommend to have your own Git repository where your MRs or PRs would happen. And then once everything is approved, you just need to flick the button, right? So not everybody who has access to your actual Git repository should have access to Cloud Manager. It should be a very governed process, right? You don't give everybody access to Jenkins, right? It's very similar. And that would be a starting point. I'll open up to the rest of the folks on the call as well to see if I've missed anything.
No, I think you covered it all. Essentially, it is a end-to-end DevOps platform for AEM, and it replaces what largely you would have as on-prem solutions made of Jenkins or whatever else you go in there. It replaces your on-prem jar files, all this kind of stuff that you really, I would say, you'd be struggling to maintain properly, because it's just a lot of tech, and you have to keep in mind. Yes, it puts in place a very stringent, and I think it's a very good kind of pipeline for getting your code, building it, compiling it, best practice analyzer, all the testing, your security testing, your performance testing, yeah, functional user testing, yeah, and then doing deploy, sign off, so forth. Yeah, these are the things that I wouldn't probably, if I look around, I probably won't find many people who implemented it properly. Yeah, so I think it's done quite well. I wrote about this back in 2018 when I was in the beta program, saying it's game over for AEM pipelines because they just did well. Like they just went, you know what, just do it the best way, and they did it, and the test came out, and it's gotten so much better over the last few years. So it's definitely like the DevOps gold plate. You want to look at Cloud Manager, say that's how you're supposed to do AEM deployment, essentially.
Okay.
Oh,
so
plus you have all the latest AEM features as well, which you like Sling features, which you don't really have on on-prem anymore, or you wouldn't have anymore.
Sure.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Venkatesh.
adding to both, like there is two aspects to Cloud Manager. One is deployment. The other one is like there are certain enterprise clients, they have their own pipelines. They will always keep asking these questions in many forums, saying that like I have my pipeline, why I have to migrate to this Cloud Manager pipeline, right? So when we move from an on-prem or any managed services to a Cloud Manager, you are hosting your application to Adobe's infrastructure, right? So they are accountable for their infrastructure, and hence they put stringent guidelines on what is best practice to be checked before it is deploying to the Adobe infrastructure. Like how we are doing our checks on our infrastructure before we deploying anything, they are doing the same thing, right? So that is the mindset change has to happen. The second thing is on our side. So we also want to convince our internal enterprise gateways and where our own standards, right? So for that, there is a provisioning within the Cloud Manager and DevOps as well, saying that you can have your own branching strategy to pipeline and your own roles, Sonar cubes, and all those things, where you can run in your repository all these checks, and then the DevOps platform, which is a Cloud Manager, providing the different tokens and keys. Using that, you can using the SDKs, Adobe IO SDKs predominantly, and you can trigger the entire process. Like it's like a chaining of your gateway with the chaining of the actual Adobe's gateway, right? So that's how the recommended approach for the many enterprises. So in case you have encountered such kind of a questions saying that, okay, can I run my own thing before going into this? Yes, it is possible.
Excellent. Thanks, Venkatesh. So hopefully, I mean, that's a good overview of Cloud Manager. Hopefully that spurred some thoughts, some questions that you might have. That was a lot of stuff covered there. I think a lot of hot topics as to like where Cloud Manager is a good fit, where it's a slight change from how we did things on-prem. And, you know, whenever we change things, there's always questions of like, well, I want to do it this way because this is what I'm used to. Does Cloud Manager do X, Y, Z? And so if you've got any of those types of questions, let's talk about them. I do want to move on to some of the questions around logging. Actually, we kind of got 3 different questions about logging, so it seems to be one of the most popular topics. The first question was around webhooks and what are some things we can do with webhooks to forward the deployment logs. In one case, it was asked for in terms of forwarding those logs to a configured email address, and then beyond that, maybe some other options for webhooks to forward logs.
You probably wrap this in together, Brett, in one go, because the other questions where it's an integration of error logs into Cloud, Trial, or Splunk. Yeah, I suppose if you were to do this via DevOps way, you could use Adobe IO because they have a tail functionality to tail the logs from instances. So you could essentially set up your own instance where you can collect the logs and do what you want with them, essentially. Yeah. So the answer to the question is, can you watch and stream them live? Yes, you can, using Adobe IO. I can post a link into the chat for everyone to review. You set it up yourself. You have all the normal credentials, and then you can stream them. And for those 3 questions, I know we're kind of answering them all in one go, but yeah, for custom perspective, yeah, you could just stream them and put them wherever you want, really, for any purposes.
Sure. So that'd be a little bit more of a pulling the stream through Adobe IO. What do we have for capabilities with webhooks? Venkatesh, or is Rami back yet? I don't know if Venkatesh, if you have experience with that.
normally like the webhooks as a concept, right? So there are many tools like not only Splunk, there are people using log analytics and many areas, right? So more than a real time, right? It is always in our cases, and now we use like a schedule or a batch kind of a thing, right? So you have as already mentioned, saying that there is an Adobe I/O, which is what your gateway to access Adobe Experience Clouds, the backend pieces of it, right? Use that and integrate your analytics. That is like more of like an app builder. Like you can even create using Adobe I/O, you can create your own schedule, and then you can write an asynchronous jobs to push the important events as alone to the log analytics kind of a way.
Oh, Brett, there's probably also the question for the audience who's asking about this. I suppose the webhooks, there is already an Adobe I/O webhooks capability, so you can hook into things like that. But when you talk to log streaming, it's kind of different realm, because webhooks are like events, and you have triggers and so forth. So you'd use it for that, like Git pushes, scenario for that, yeah. So you really wouldn't want to just stream the logs into because you don't know, like it's a stream essentially, just direct coming in, yeah. So
the one use case I'd be curious of, and I'd be curious if anybody's got an answer for, like, what if I had a type of event that was like very, very rarely logged, but when it is logged, I want an email, like basically a fatal error or something like that. Would that like anything like that be possible?
Well, suppose you do this if you're gonna rely on logs to do that. Yeah, you would actually have to monitor those logs, and you could write yourself an extractor. Like if you can use Prometheus or something. You get prompt to basically sit there and monitor the stream and raise alerts, for example. Yeah, if you were to do it like yourself, yeah. But yeah, you could potentially use also like the normal events, and just if you have an error that you capture somewhere to log it, you could essentially also log an event within Adobe I/O from your instance as well, for example. If you're going to implement it, if you're going to use hooks, webhooks, you go down that route, saying, okay, if I can capture it in an error, then potentially I can raise those events as webhooks as well, if it's something rare that you can identify.
Rami, I think you are on mute.
Waiting for you to.
It's hard to believe that you could be muted, but. Oh no, you might have to give permissions. Yeah, keep going. We'll catch you soon, Rami. Excellent. So, in terms of the logs, we've got. Go ahead, Venkatesh.
Yeah, just one more point. Like when you talk about like an important event, it is more of like an observability concept, right? So when you talk about observability and monitoring, I think recently there is an integration is possible between the log monitoring tools with Adobe cloud services as well, like New Relic or some such kind of an integration. Use those integrations, and what will happen is these two will directly talk to each other using an Adobe I/O, and it can listen to an event, right? So when such kind of like as Brett has mentioned, saying that when such important event occurs, automatically this New Relic connector within the Adobe Experience Cloud will listen to that event, and then it will alert your internal stakeholders for further actions.
Yeah, and can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. So that's my assignment for the day. So a couple things. Yes, definitely New Relic. If you've not played around with the New Relic add-on, well, it's not an add-on, it's part of AEM's cloud service. Please look into that. Now, going back to the alert part, and Brett, to answer your question, I think it depends on the type of error, right? So to me, there's multiple layers going all the way from the front end, from the site going down, for example, in which case there should be a monitoring tool that directly hits the site, etc. And Adobe has that as well. And if you get a P1, that's how you get a P1 ticket, right? If the site is down, oh my God, you're going to receive that email. So that's one way of looking at it. The second part is if you have a fundamental error, like again, an oh my God error, but the site is up, like an API call that's always giving you a 500 or something major like that, especially when you're looking at something like an e-commerce or a transactional flow in general. I think it's not about waiting for it to be written to a log in order to get a webhook, in order to read that and parse it out of the file and then send an email. I think your monitoring should happen right in the code, where it's like, okay, if you get a 500, don't wait for it to be written to the log, because you don't know what happens if your actual IO falls apart. What happens if it's so major that it never makes it to the log file? Keep in mind that the log file is a byproduct of an error. So if you really want to read that error, right, I would say, okay, within your Java code or JavaScript or whatever you're using your SPA, you should have an internal trigger that goes, if this happens, bypass everything. Don't go to go to New Relic, but send me an email directly, right? It's no different than a workflow finishing and you're notifying the users that the workflow finished. This one is a little bit more drastic. But yeah, there's just the type of error, I think, has to do with how major it is. Lead submissions, for example. So I've had a client where their entire site is based on content. It wasn't an e-commerce site. It was really, I want you to know about my company and how well we do. And at the end of the day, I just want you to submit a lead. Think of even automotive back in the day, not today, where the entire site, the whole point of it is, look at these pretty pictures. I want to convince you to buy a car without somebody talking to you until you submit a lead. And the moment you submit a lead, that's when the human interaction starts to happen. So to them, the submission, that form submission, was as crucial as the site being up. So the notification, we literally had Selenium testing running on these forms. I think we did like 3 or 4 times a day for every single form, 3,600 forms on the site being tested on a daily basis. And if one of them fail, you're getting notifications directly. It bypasses the logs. So again, just understand what the logs are meant to do, or what they should be used for.
Yeah,
and see, I'm going to be quiet.
No, I like that approach, because I think sometimes when you ask a question and how do I do this, it seems hard to do this with this tool. There's always value in taking a step back and saying, well, is this the appropriate solution in the first place? And that's kind of, I think, what you're hitting on, Rami, is like, in these situations, this might not be your best path. So forcing it to work, yeah, we can come up with ways to force it to work through this, but there might be better methods as well. All right, so one of the last things, the logs, we've gotten questions around integrations with things like CloudTrail, Splunk, other tools. What are some, like, what do we have available out of the box, and what would we have to kind of do something custom for? And Max, you kind of mentioned, like, with the IO thing, I assume that'd be more for the custom solution. But like in terms of Splunk, I believe you can hook it up out of the box. Is that the one? New Relic
as well, yeah. Yep.
So then is there...
New Relic, I am aware of it. I mean, there is a documentation also available within Experience Lake. I'll ping you that. Yeah, go ahead, Max.
Yeah, I have spoken to the team previously, and they were recommended to do the same thing, to actually pull the logs from Splunk, because you can essentially, you're going to Splunk and setting up an exporter. So it'll be using Adobe IO. So any tools that you have, like in the DevOps world, you have this concept of exporters, which they basically either take the metrics of whatever you're monitoring or taking logs. So, and most tools that have these kind of capabilities, they allow you to create their own custom exporters, which do stuff. You can tell, okay, connect to this IO and download logs. Yeah, so Tile will be one of those. That's what I was mentioning. Prometheus, like the movie. It's an open source version, or you can do it in Splunk. They all do this. So,
excellent. All right, so let's move on from the topic of logs. I think we've hit that pretty hard. If there's any other questions, feel free to add them to the chat. So one of the questions, I'm going to go slightly out of order here. Cloud Manager. So we don't have the ability to access Config Manager directly in Cloud Service via the UI. And so there's sometimes we need to get some configurations out there quicker than doing a gigantic build and full deployment of a full code base. What are the approaches for doing that, or what's the recommendations? And Venkatesh, we'll start with you.
Yeah, in my view, like touching the OIJ configuration on a running production instance is like putting your hand on the fire. Like there is an engine is going on and you are suddenly taking an bogey out of it. It will derail. Simple. Right, it's not a best practice and it is not a recommended approach as well. When you touch directly OSJ configuration, such kind of an framework, when something is running on its own, that is why Adobe has put such kind of restrictions, right? So that the product itself puts such restriction, which means it is not a best practice, right? So we just so the concept of cloud manager is always whatever you want to do currently in the manual process or go and easy access or all those things is like a code as a configuration, right? You just need to write run modes and put it as part of your code, and it has to go through its own pipeline checks, and then it will tell saying that okay, you are done it correctly, and hence I am allowing to put it into my infrastructure. So that's what we have to follow.
All right. So yes, I completely agree that there's a good reason why these restrictions are in place. I want to touch the stove anyways. So if I really, really, really want to do it, how do I do it?
So let me okay. I'll add a little bit and then we'll go from there. So because I always like to sort of to challenge the way you do things today because it's fun. Let's look at AEM, and for the longest time, and I know it's going to touch also on something else because we're talking about what's mutable, what's not mutable, and why. But really, the most easy to change piece in AEM is content, right? And the reason for that is it's fast time to market. You want to give this to business and go crazy, right? Sell stuff. As you go up from there, you go into configurations. So you go into design dialogues, you go into templates, and then things start to restrict and slow down a little bit because you want the smaller funnel of people to touch that stuff. Then typically in AEM, you hopped into properties and you hopped into something like a dictionary, for example, which still, by the way, requires code deployment on cloud. But it's a little bit slack as well because you can still have more people touch it. Now you go up to OSGI configurations, and before you did have access to go into AEM directly to go in and do the changes. Today you don't. And the small answer to this is there is no way without an actual code deployment that I'm aware of that you can go in and change an OSGI configuration. However, there is a layer in between now that you can actually do right on Cloud Manager, which is Cloud Manager configurations. So I don't know if you've actually looked into this for the person that asked that question, but if you do have a need where there is a major configuration that you need to change, you can still quote unquote change it on the fly without a code deployment through Cloud Manager. You would have to change your variables. It's no longer going to pull from an OSGI configuration. It's going to pull from the configuration in Cloud Manager. And we do that a lot, especially for keys. So things that should be *****, not plain text right in your code base, whether it's an OSGI configuration or something else. So look into that as a solution. But my challenge is it really a need that you have to change something that frequently? Because if it's something that needs to change frequently, then it should not be an OSGI configuration. It's part of that system now. It's part, what you're truly saying when you do an OSGI configuration is you're going, if you are an author instance, because it's down to what your run mode is. And if you're type prod, I want to change this very important key to be 1, 2, 3 instead of 4, 5, 6. And if it's something that changes frequently, that needs to come down that funnel. That's no longer an OSGI configuration. That could now be a Cloud Manager configuration that you can go in and alter. Or it could be something within, I don't know, a client context configuration or something that you would do right in the JCR and read from the JCR rather than an OSGI configuration.
Yep. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I know we've built a lot of sites where, like, for instance, you want to change a URL of something, and some of those things can be done in shared component properties or global component properties if you're using ACS Commons, which is something where it's still only edited in one spot, but it's actually treated as content because of the velocity. You want to be able to change that value. So that's one option, but I think it's really good. Max, anything to add?
I was going to say exact same thing. I mean, OSGI, the reason why you can't change this configuration settings on the fly is because the OSGI settings get compiled out and they sit on the basically in the container itself. So they're not actually in the repository, so you can't change them. So there's a process. I cover this in my article. There's a process of converting the packages you create, typically in the old days, into Sling feature files, and that extracts basically all the code in OSGI and just whacks them on a disk. Yeah. So you can't on the fly do it. Yeah, you're totally right. You use variables. Yeah. But if you do building your own personal services, there's absolutely no reason why you can't use configurations, and just stick that into your configurations. You can build your own consoles like and have your own configurations within the repository. And you really should be thinking of it like that as well anyway, because if you're building multi-site, if you have an SGI, it's kind of one for everybody. And it's not really like, I can't think of many things you should do that anymore these days. Everything should be like per site, per page, per folder. So you might as well just make it all content driven and then just have your services be smart about it. Yeah. Because yeah, this I really can't. I struggle finding anything that with these guys you would rewrite in the SGI. I would highly encourage you to avoid using the SGI as your fallback. Yeah, use content. That's what CMS is for.
Exactly.
So normally, yeah. So normally, like in terms of configurations, right? There are multiple ways you can store the configurations. So normally, like the way currently, the traditional way how currently AEM is built, like people are always thinking of OSJ as a configuration repository, right? Any configuration comes in, they'll create a run mode and they will create configuration the OSJ, which is not also a right way, because over a period of time, AEM has evolved. They come up with the different ways you store the configurations. It can be like in a context-aware configurations where you have a multiple ways you can inherit your configurations, right? It can be in the site level, or it can be a page level. It can be the folder level. So based on, like, if it is a global, it's a global level configuration. If it is a country, it's a country level configuration. So for that also you need to have to write a code. But it would be like, rather than dumping into OSJ everything, you have to be absolutely clear how you want to manage your configuration, right? So only the tokens or keys, such kind of things can go into OSJ, because as Max already mentioned, saying that it is all like, again, it is do a compilation and it is stored into its own way of storing that particular configuration, where context aware is not such kind of a thing. Even in the cloud manager, it was recommended as a best practice that avoid as much as possible to store the configuration as part of the run modes, right? So run modes are very, very limited if you take the cloud manager. So you cannot create your own custom run modes, where it has its only like production stage and I think UID, I guess. Yeah. So these are all the three standard run modes only available, where most of the things Adobe best practices to recommend to go towards context-aware configurations.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Kadesh. All right, so we did get a question that came in, and I am curious if we got any creative solutions for this one. So a question from Roshan. We don't have separate access control for production pipelines. So if I give somebody access to anything, they have access to everything, which means if they can deploy to development, they can deploy to production. What are your thoughts on that? Let's start with Max.
I was hoping somebody else can have a go at that one. I know it's true.
I'm off the hook today, so this is great.
Yeah, no,
that's hilarious.
Yes, that is true. That is, I have raised this with Adobe, and we've spoken to us quite a bit. Yeah, I have seen people deploy to production by mistake because the approve and the reject button is so close together, and there is no dialogues. When you press one of them, it just goes approve. When you're like, you can't stop it either. What's happening? So yeah, that happens right now, and there is a dilemma. So yeah, you need to train your people, and you shouldn't really give away the pipelines to anyone. I think Vengesh was mentioning before, what I've done with some of my clients now is I don't give them access to the cloud. Yeah, I let them. They have GitHub, they have Bitbucket, so I do all of the basically management of the what goes into where in there. So the PRs manage the deploy. So if they want to deploy to production, they merge into master, do PR, and then whoever's got approval to merge into master will do that. And then you can set up your pipelines to automatically start deploying. So essentially, you don't really want to manage your permissions of access to like the pipeline stack. That's Adobe's problem. Don't even bother doing it. That's why you shouldn't be putting it in there, because you'll be forever building that. Just do it in your side, and you should be doing that anyway, because you want to get people to commit and manage your code in your Git, and not just deploy whatever they want into commit directly into Adobe's Git, because that's also an anti-pattern, right? Because you're not actually doing PRs. You just simply, I'm just going to just commit this code, and then you don't know where it came from. Yeah. So essentially, yeah, you really want to manage it through. So you have somebody set this up initially on your own Git, and then just have direct commits. I've got pipelines examples for Bitbucket and GitHub. So if you guys want to reach out, I'll give them to you.
Right, and I think it's a good point in terms of like the development pipeline could just be set up as a trigger so that it happens automatically, so that somebody doesn't necessarily need access to do that. Rami, anything to add?
Real life story that probably made me lose half of my hair. I blame anything on me losing hair because that way it's not my fault. But Max is like, turn off video.
You look all right with hair there, buddy.
Max has had a lot of problems, and I've had almost as many. Like,
I positioned the camera accordingly. But so the client that I'm talking about, we've had probably, I don't know, 80 different developers, just that magnitude of a client. There is a tool out there. So if you're thinking Jenkins, and I'll pick on Jenkins first, and then we can go into other things. But Jenkins, for example, has a direct connection to Cloud Manager, where you can literally just write a script within your Git repository that governs what happens during the build. So for that client specifically, what ended up happening is we would go through, you would do your PR, that would push into, let's say, your develop branch, which we eventually know will go to your dev environment. Once that happens, Jenkins will do its thing. You're doing your internal build, and especially when you're looking at bigger enterprises, even though Adobe does its own due diligence and has a whole bunch of checks and balances during the build process to make sure that there is no problems, a lot of these companies, especially that big of an enterprise, will go in and be like, no, we're running our own SonarQube, we have our own steps that we have to go through. So you're gonna run through your Jenkins process, and eventually once all your checks and balances are good to go, it would push to dev. But now we have that script that does the governance as well, that goes, once the code is pushed to dev, fire up a build on Cloud Manager as well. So exactly like Max said, and that's sort of why when we started this call, one of the things I said is Cloud Manager is not Jenkins, right? It's not really a governance of deployment as much as it is the actual deployment process. What happens before has to be governed by something else. No different than Azure. You can write a little YAML script that also governs and runs through a specific set of steps. But at the end of the day, all Cloud Manager should be doing for you is deploy, right? The governance is the checks and balances, the approval process should happen pre you going into Cloud Manager. I know in some cases it is challenging. We are not micromanaging permissions. It is in some cases annoying, especially when you have somebody who has 2 developers, they just want to have one PR the other and then eventually deploy and not automate it. And to Max's point, sometimes you hit that approve button and you go crud. And then I think everybody has done it at some point. My 2 cents would be, if you're using a tool outside, so Azure, Jenkins, whatever, look at the script to automate based on your governances, right? Don't give access to Cloud Manager except if you absolutely have to. It's truly an administrative privilege when you go into Cloud Manager. And hopefully through the cycle, as Adobe sees this, we might see more micromanagement permissions, but that doesn't exist today.
Thanks, Rami. Anything left on that one, Venkatesh? Otherwise, we can move on to another question.
Okay, so one thing is on the straightforward, there is no out-of-box way to control it. Yeah, for a per program, you have test and production. The stage, you have access to all, right? So the governance has to happen outside. It can be like done in multiple ways. One creative way is like if there are more developers and they want to do an individual, you can create a custom screen or small app. Based on what they have selected, you can do an authentication against your AD or something, and then you can trigger using an Adobe I/O to where you want to push it. Or you can have a peer branch, like that one solution already Max has mentioned. It's more of like a creative thought process has to come in such kind of scenarios.
Sure, makes sense. Can always solve it with more software. Excellent. So let's chat real quick on, since I've not seen any other questions, and we do have time for a couple more questions from the folks that are attending if anybody has them. Otherwise, we're going to chat real quick on just the concept of mutable versus immutable areas in AEM. I think it's just a good understanding in AEM Cloud Service and part of why things are the way they are, why the process does what it does and takes the time that it does. I guess if we want to talk a little bit about mutable and immutable areas and separation in AEM, things that we can't change at runtime. If you want to start with that, Venkatesh.
Yes, this mutable, immutable concept is not new. with the Cloud Manager. It exists since I think from AEM 6.5 recent versions onwards, right? So it is always like not why it was like forced from Cloud Manager. It is started forcing it. Currently, people are still using it in 6.5, but when you start moving towards the Cloud Manager, the restrictions apply. Again, the same point, right? So it is their infrastructure, and they have to make sure that the new upgrades shouldn't impact the existing their infrastructure, right? So that is where this restrictions comes in. Uh, Mostly like anything under libs or etc or all those things will become immutable, where you cannot change anything, right? You are trying to change your own application code, which is what recommended as well.
All right. What you got to add, Max?
Oh, I can do a shameless plug on that before Remy will do it as well. I've actually, if you look at dispatcher module, it's got a lot of these immutable configurations, which are very hard to track down. So I recently wrote an article and I wrote some code to try to help testing like the full stack on your local. So when you talk about dispatcher, there is quite a few areas which are like Linux configurations for HTTPD and available sites that you can modify, and it can get a bit tricky for people who set up dispatch initially, where they just modify things and the things break and they don't know, you can't test them locally until they deploy. I suppose in AEM it's a bit more straightforward for you because you can't modify those areas, but in dispatcher you find there's a problem. I totally agree as well. Yeah, you should, there's overrides and inside the AEM, so you shouldn't be modifying anything outside of apps as far as the application configuration concern, right? So any of the UIs you want to change, they always go into apps, right? Everybody knows that. You can override essentially everything. There's only a few times where I had to go and dip into the forbidden well where you can't override certain files, but that's part of the game.
And hence the customization is always a tricky in Cloud Manager. Like, so it's absolutely necessary because AEM is a platform. It is not just like a product, it's a platform, right? So when a platform comes as a concept where it will provide a lot of things out of the box, right? That is the process, means that's the process that you have to follow in order to achieve certain steps, right? Doing a customization, you need to be absolutely clear saying that is it really required. You can challenge that, right? Why you cannot do this way rather than this, and you have to understand before customizing it, is it the right approach, is it a best practice to do that way, right? So that is the question we have to ask ourselves before we doing any customization.
Sure. Further thoughts, Rami?
I feel obligated now they asked, but no, I joke. So going back to just the definition of mutable versus immutable, I think a lot of, when you're looking at it, your train of thought is why, right? Why is this specific path mutable versus what's immutable? To Max's point, there are elements in dispatcher, and that's the reason it's mutable versus immutable is because there are governances that Adobe has to sort of maintain. Let me give you an example, right? If you have a security rule that is needed to be pushed to everybody because somebody found a way around the dispatcher rule, that goes into a part of the system where you truly cannot alter or change because it's mandatory. It's like an antivirus. It's like your checks and balances when your company gives you a corporate level laptop, etc. These are things you cannot change. They'll give you a play area or a play zone for you to put in your customization, right? And these are valid customizations like dispatcher rules. Of course, you're going to have your own dispatcher rules based on your domain and everything else in between. Going into AEM, so keep in mind that when you go into the containerization of things, it depends on where things are stored and what you use them for. So typically UI content is really your playground. You can go in there and do whatever you want, but that's because that's where your templates are. So your /conf, for example, because templates, content fragments, et cetera, go into that as well. However, just to clarify, when we're talking about customization, there is two sides, right? There's valid customization. You creating your template, you creating your dispatcher rule. These are all valid, and the system, even though it's quote unquote a SaaS system, is allowing you to do so in order to deliver the content that you need whenever you need it. There are layers though, so your /libs. So now we're going into overlays, which is still a customization, but I can guarantee you if you start playing around there, at one point or another, it's going to break because now you're overlaying something, making the assumption that the underlying code and logic doesn't change. That worked well because you know exactly when you're going to upgrade your AEM. You know exactly when the next service pack is going to be installed. And even there, that it has its own challenges. Even with AMS, there was a little bit of a manual process there because, well, then you have to talk to your CSE and eventually do the manual process, do your testing, etc. AEM as a cloud service is not as forgiving because you're going to go to sleep and wake up and you're on a totally different SDK. With it, you know, it could be Coral 4, not Coral 3. So there could be a lot of fundamentals that are changing. So draw the line. The mutability has, yes, there are technical limitations due to the fact that you're on a container, or things that you can't change runtime, right? It's just, that is the image, that is the thing. It's not going to change until it's destroyed and rebuilt. But even within your overlays, you have to be really careful. I've had a lot of clients, especially in the DAM. There's always somebody who wants to do a DAM change because there's something about the interface that they don't like. You know, add a button here for a report, add a button there for, I don't know, the person that last touched an asset, etc. But that's going to come at a cost, right? And if it's truly a feature that you want added to AEM, to the interface, please do put a ticket. Say, hey, this is a feature, and if Adobe realizes this is a common feature between every single client, they'll spend the time and the effort on the roadmap to add that feature as well.
Very good. All right, we are kind of coming close to time here. We've got maybe time for one more question if one comes in via the chat. Otherwise, I'll start wrapping us up with a few closing things about the AEM Champion program. Before I do, any final thoughts from anybody?
I think so. Good. Thank you, Ray.
I'm good. Yeah. If you're the one thing that I'm going to say really quickly, if you are using Cloud Manager, if you have Teams or Slack, do invest the time to use webhooks to make sure that your deployment process notification actually goes to a channel. It does help your developers a lot to know when the deployment starts and when it finishes, etc. It just gives them a line of sight on what's going on. There are plenty of documentations online to get it done. If you're hitting a brick wall, let us know as well. We can give you a hand.
Excellent. All right, so real quick on the Champions program, I'm hoping the slide is up, but if you're interested in joining this Champions program, I do want to let everybody know that there are applications open for the 2023 class. Those applications close at the end of this week, so now is the time. If you or somebody that you think would be a good fit for this program, it's guaranteed to make you better looking, more attractive, guaranteed to not add hair, unfortunately, but it will make you smarter, absolutely. We've got one heck of a smart group of folks. Some of these folks will be returning in the 2023 class, but we are absolutely looking forward to new folks being joining as well. We want to keep everything fresh. AEM community continues to move, the technology continues to move, and we're going to stay on top of it. So if you're interested in joining, you can take a snap of the QR code on the screen. It'll take you to it, or reach out. We'll get you linked up to that. And then finally, to close us out, Office Hours. We will have another one coming up in a month from now. You already know the site because that's how you signed up for this one. So, but we're shooting to have one, as Robert mentioned earlier, once per month. So looking forward to touching base again in June. With that, if there's no final questions, we can wrap it up.
One final question I had for you guys, since you're dealing mostly with clients and as Adobe partners, is what it's a huge conversation to start, but what is the number one factor that prevents, or not prevents, but the hesitation moving from like a managed services to cloud, AEM as a cloud service? The top reason, is it the mutable versus immutable areas that we're talking about? Is it the always on kind of nature of cloud? Is it stack, tech stack, architecture? What is the number one reason that you see that folks are hesitating to come on board? Because there's a whole onboarding journey on Adobe Experience League, so I'm sure it's a big topic. Thank you.
It's all you mean the blockers for people buying into migration? I think from what I've seen so far is that it's a scary thing because you are literally trying to redo what you already done. So you've done this investment, you hired a team, you got, maybe 50 people went through the Adobe project, right? And then you're like, oh, I got to do this again. And how many people have to have? And yeah, if you, I've seen projects who couldn't start for 2 years. They've been trying to do it. They actually went, yeah, let's do it. Yeah, everybody's bought. And then we're just like, how do we do it? How do we do it for 2 years? So yeah, so then finding a person who can say, I'm gonna give you a plan how to get there, and then we'll fix the rest. I think that's a big issue because I think the amount of things you think you need are overwhelming. Because if you look at all the things, but you have to have somebody look at your stuff and say, okay, that's how you have to move your things, and that's very hard to come by. Somebody can look at your specific thing and tell you're right. That's how your thing's gonna have to move, yeah. And because of what happens, I see in some teams they go, all right, let us achieve 100% unit coverage, right? And you're like, okay, if you haven't achieved it now, you're never going to achieve it. It's impossible, yeah, because it's the amount of time. If you draw the graph, it's like it's whatever you had, double it, yeah. So it's essentially like you kind of self blocking yourself from it because you just go, oh my god, I'm so stuck. So, but it's all the things you mentioned and above, and there's plenty more. There's a page from Adobe about things you to change, and you look at that and you go, there is no way we're gonna do this.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna pitch it to Bangladesh for this one.
Fine.
Okay.
We'll get to you around.
So two major
This
points,
is my show.
like yeah, gated community. Okay, so 2 points from my side is like the two main things which is driving this migration is in major enterprises is the complexity of the project, which means how many integrations or how many integrations you are having it with your third parties, right? So that is one of the complexity increases. The people moving towards the cloud will be decreases. That thing that we are seeing. The second thing is which version of AEM they are currently in, how often they are modernizing their code base, right? Because AEM has came a long way from AEM 6.2 to now, which is in 6.5 or even the cloud service manager, right? So many things evolved. They keep adopting the best practices and they are changing to the industry standards. Someone has done the implementation 6 years back. That's a one-time investment. When they have done and then they relook at it, the cloud migration journey, it would be difficult, right? So they have to either instead of looking for a migration, they can redesign the site with the new standards, right? So that's how the approach has to be, rather than reinventing the wheel, like how we have to migrate. They have to think saying that how we can redesign to the new standards.
All right, take us home, Rami.
Sounds good. If you've ever seen the movie Frozen, you know the Into the Unknown song. That typically represents how every single client feels when you tell them anything about AEM as a cloud service. I think to Max's point as well, in order to start the plan, you sort of need to start. And a lot of the times it's even going from on-prem to AMS feels a little bit more comfortable because the technology is very close. Really, you're going, instead of me buying my own racks and my own servers, Adobe will take care of it, but a lot of it runs in parallel. You just need to worry about what's DMZ'd and what's not, and then make things talk to each other from outside to inside. When you go into AEM as a cloud service, there are fundamentals that does change. And I have been in meetings where the client literally, it was just purely fear of the unknown. It's not about even getting to a point where we can solve the problem. We haven't even defined what the problem is, if there is any. It's truly, do I want to get out of my comfort zone? And this is not just business, it's business development team, marketeers, everything else, even people who it would not affect much. For example, content entry folks. It's like, well, it's still components that you drag and drop on the page. You're not going to feel a difference. Maybe the gray is going to be a different shade. But that's about all you're going to see. But it's you need to implant the fact that there is a solution to the problem, right? And then we can try to figure out what the problem is. And honestly, that was my number one problem. Once that's done, there is a couple fundamentals that people need to understand. For example, AEM being horizontal expansion versus vertical expansion. A lot of the times when you're on-prem, it's like just throw processing power at it, switch it to SSDs instead of normal hard drives, add more publisher instances. So there is this vertical expansion that we typically do with AEM, even on AMS, where when you're looking at AEM as a cloud service, it's a lot more horizontal. It's like, no, you cannot have a query that takes 6 hours. Doesn't make a difference how many containers I'm going to throw at it. The system will go down. So there is some fundamentals that does change that we need people to understand. Microservices versus, I think it's ImageMagick is the little plugin for renditions, etc. So yes, there are fundamentals, but until we overcome the hump of, fear of the unknown, you won't be able to go anywhere.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think if I were to summarize all three, what I'm basically hearing is, the path isn't the same for everybody, which is what causes a lot of the analysis paralysis. However, there's definitely folks that can help, that can kind of help you work through define the issues, solve the issues. We have yet to hit the client that couldn't solve the issues. There's ways to do these things. They're different, but different isn't always bad. And sometimes they're different for actually some very positive reasons. So with that, we're kind of at time. So it's been great. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Bangladesh. Thank you, Rami. You guys are awesome. Greg, thanks for being part of the crowd and pitching in as well. Our fearless leader. That's all. I think we'll wrap it up and we'll see everybody in